So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are today doing the fourth of our series on emotional well-being during the pandemic, and we are talking today about how we can cope with grief and loss in these difficult times, especially in the second wave. And we have with us once again psychologist Hvovi Bhagwagar, who will help us unpack and understand the topic. As most of you are aware, we've been doing this series for the last 1 month, and today is the fourth in the series. We have done a wide variety of topics. We started with talking about handling negative news onslaught and how to stop doom scrolling. We talked about anxiety, and we talked of coping strategies for the youth. And you will be able to find these recordings. If you missed them, you can find the recordings either on our Facebook page if you scroll down, or if you look up on our YouTube channel, you'll find them as well. And similarly, we had also done the three topics, and I don't actually, I should have got the third one as well. All three were done in Hindi as well. And again, the recordings are on our various channels. And again, a reminder that this is not replacing a personal consultation. The session's being recorded. And if you have questions, you can, or even comments, you can share on your Facebook, on our Facebook or YouTube, where you're following the live feed. And you can always write to us at editor@patientsengage.com and follow us on our social channels, be it Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. And we will be doing the same topic with Snigdha Mishra on Thursday. And that will be in Hindi. So let's get started, because I think this is a difficult topic and we have a lot to cover. So let's talk with Hvovi Bhagwagar, and I'm Aparna Mittal. Thank you for joining, Hvovi.
Hi, Aparna. Thank you for this series. And thank you for this topic, which I think is, it really needs to be out there. And I hope people listen in and ask questions as we go along.
Right. We've already received a few questions and concerns, so we will try to pick those up as well. As you know, we know that the second wave especially has affected every family across the country. There has been unprecedented loss of lives. People are still struggling to find ways to grieve. How do you grieve when you've lost 4, 5, 6 members of the family, right? So there's a lot that's going on. But as we kind of unpack all of that, can we define, we use terms like grief, loss, bereavement quite interchangeably, but, can you kind of help us define these as well?
Very relevant question, because grief is, we use these interchangeably, but they hold different meanings, and they especially hold different meanings based on cultural context. So grief is the most widely used term, and it's our reaction to loss. However, that loss is not just, it could be physical loss of maybe somebody that you love, a loved one, but grief could also be like a social loss, like a divorce or a loss of a job. Remember, I spoke in the last meeting about the young girl who lost her graduation,
Right.
and who lost her job. So that's grief. Yeah, it can be experienced in the body, in physical form, emotionally. There could be a social reaction. And when you lose someone that you really love and who has been an attachment figure in your life, that grief that you carry with you is the way in which you adapt to that loss.
Right.
Your emotional, physical reaction to it. And our assumptive world, that is a set of assumptions we hold about our world, the safety of our world, people in that world who are attachment figures, people who make us feel capable and safe. When someone dies, then we lose that assumptive world. We lose that meaning that it holds for us, which is why we grieve, not just for that the person's loss, but the loss of our assumptive world.
Right.
What it means to us and our meaning of what life is for us.
Right.
Now, what is bereavement? Bereavement is that long process that a person may go through where they are coping with the grief. Bereavement can go on for months, it can go on for years. Everybody has a grief reaction that's very individual.
Right.
20 years I have worked with people who've displayed variety of forms of death and loss. I've worked in situations of natural disaster like floods and earthquakes. And I wouldn't say that I can see a Xerox copy of anyone's bereavement similar. Everyone
Mm,
is different. Their individual loss, their individual coping is
mm,
different. So their period of bereavement may change or may differ. So it's about bereavement is the period in which you adapt to the loss.
right,
Mourning is very culture specific. Yeah. In some cultures, black is okay to wear at a funeral. In some cultures, white is accepted,
right.
right? In some cultures, we honor and respect the dead by actually cooking non-vegetarian food. And in
Mm,
some cultures, that's considered taboo. So
right.
mourning is the specific rituals that go with the loss. And sometimes they happen in the immediate period following the death. And
Mm,
sometimes they carry on depending upon the cultural beliefs and norms.
right.
They've changed over time, but every culture adapts to them differently. So that's the difference between these three terms.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's part of life. And
Hmm.
normally you say yes, it's natural process in life that you will go through losses of family members, etc. But how is COVID and the second wave specifically change the way you look at losses and the way you look at grief?
So, somewhere around April or May of 2020, I forget the exact month, NIMH, the National Institute of Mental Health Abroad, they
Hmm.
had done a projection.
Hmm.
In this projection, they saw that if you have the first wave of COVID,
Hmm.
what are the kind of emotional impacts that are going to come in?
Right.
So, with each wave of COVID, the grief reactions would rise on an incline steeply, is what their
Right.
projections showed, which is where it is right now. The projections showed that as each wave of COVID comes in, our cumulative emotional suffering will increase, it won't decrease,
Right.
because the losses will build up. And if we look at what's happened in the last 2 months, right, it's not rocket science, but we can look at how projections sometimes are pretty accurate, especially when
Hmm.
it comes to COVID-19 and what has happened, what researchers label as bad deaths.
Right.
So there is a group of researchers from NIMHANS that have done a study on grief in COVID-19, and they say that we can anticipate that because of the type of deaths that we have seen, the lack of preparation, the lack of medical supplies, the access to very, very critical medical equipment,
Hmm.
and then the sudden progression of the illness and unexpected demise, no time to
Right.
prepare, no wills, like you said, many members in a family gone at the same time. So all
Right.
of this put together is what we are calling as a bereavement overload. So there's been a lot of change in the way we are looking at grief when it comes to COVID-19. Typically, we would see that if losses happen, even if there is a calamity, not many people develop something called as complicated grief.
Hmm.
The complicated grief is where the bereavement period may be much longer, more complicated, may elongate, as
Right.
also the person may be in a state of denial,
Right.
not willing to move and accept the loss. And we probably will see a lot more of that with COVID-19 than with other kinds of calamities. There are a number of reasons for it. The reasons could be because of, this being a collective grief, the
Hmm.
lack of accessibility or availability of care, the fact that people don't have access to the normal types of mourning. There's a
Right.
term called disenfranchised grief. This
Right.
typically means that you lose the social gatherings that would typically help you franchise that grief into the common population. So the 13 days of mourning, people come together, they help and they support. All
Hmm.
that is gone. Yeah. I mean, how many Zoom calls can you do and how many video calls can you do? Prayer
Right.
meetings, everything has shifted online. Satsangs used to be held that used to calm the soul. So all of this has become disenfranchised. That's another reason why
Right.
people are anticipating that COVID-19 will have complications in the grieving process.
Right.
The other thing is this anticipatory grief. If you notice on TV or the stories that people have been talking about in COVID-19, it's about constantly being in a
Can you speak
state
up a
where,
little bit?
sorry,
Yeah.
so it's being in a state where you can't really say goodbye.
Hmm.
So that
Correct.
is what we call as anticipatory grief. And this won't be just in the people who've lost family members, We're going to see this in doctors and nurses as well, because of the tough calls that they need to be taking about, say, two people who need ventilator and they give the ventilator to one person. They
Mm.
don't have time to mourn the person who's gone away because of their call, their
Right.
decision. So we're
Right.
going to see a lot of anticipatory grief probably in this population as well. So I won't say that it's doomsday, but I'd say we need to be prepared. And I've spoken to you personally about this, that we are probably going to see a lot more of this emotional upsurge towards the end of the year when it
Right.
starts hitting people about the losses.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And there's also been this, and you talked of the lack of rituals, but there's also the fact that uh, people have not been able to be present, right? So either the person, a family member, has passed away inside an hospital all by themselves, or even if they came back home or whatever, family members have not been able to come from a different city or from a different country. So they're not been there during. So the importance of presence itself is kind of a issue, right? So how does that affect people as well?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's the anticipatory grief, the fact that you don't have a closure.
Right.
And if you
Right.
don't have that type of a closure, that's what creates a traumatic stress in the individual. And it leads to complicated mourning or complicated grieving. The models we have of grieving so far have talked to us about, again, complicated mourning, but not of this fashion.
Hmm.
We've had losses and we've had calamities and disasters, but never one where you can't attend a funeral,
Hmm.
or never one where you can't attend a prayer meet. I mean, this is unprecedented. We don't have research for it. We
Right.
don't have textbooks that tell us what to do about it. So
Right.
we'll have to work on the go and help humans come to some understanding. My guess is that we're going to be having good idea about how to cope with this kind of calamity only months later. That
Right.
is documented evidence of how to cope. Until then, we're going to use our resources and just be good humans and help people the best we can.
And there's also this whole, because you said that everybody struggled with lack of resources. So there's also this whole regret of, did I do enough? Could I have done more? And also the fact that while that process of, looking for resources, you've just been running around. You have no time to process any of this that is happening.
That's exactly it. That time, even now I have clients. So I have allotted one day of the week where I see only clients who are grieving from
Mm.
COVID deaths. And the stories I hear are the same. They're a small group of people. I'm not seeing a large number, but the stories have a similarity to them. And most of the running thread through many of the stories is a stuck stage of guilt.
Mm.
Could I have tried something else?
Right.
Maybe I shouldn't have listened to the doctor, or maybe I should have listened earlier, or
Mm.
maybe I should have done this, maybe I shouldn't have gone out. It's that stuck stage that I was talking about,
Right.
which doesn't allow a person to really move forward and grieve naturally, because
Right.
obviously the brain is trying to fix or solve a
Mm.
problem that is gone, but is still trying to do that in some way or the other. It's sad and it's heavy, yeah, for
Right.
people to carry this kind of burden.
Right. And how do people, what are you seeing as different ways of expression of grief? Because we also hear people say that uh, some of them might just go back to working as hard as possible, or there'll be others who want to talk about it more. um, how do people, are there different ways, and is that linked to your personality, or is it just, how do you differentiate between that versus trying to shut down grief? How can how can somebody figure this out for themselves?
Um, Thankfully, there is research on grief that has been pretty robust over the years.
Hmm.
And it has stayed robust because we do see there are patterns typically that grief follows.
Right.
We still have to have data emerging about COVID, but let's
Hmm.
look at some of the patterns that have already been explored that have, like I said, stayed robust over a period of time.
Right.
So you use some really important words, like there are people who avoid the grief or don't want
Hmm.
to think about it. They stay stuck. So let me just share something that may be helpful to people if they have a visual
Sure.
A visual to see, it might be helpful. So I'm just sharing my screen. Is it visible, Aparna? I'm just going to make it full
Yeah,
screen.
yeah, if you can make it full screen, it will be better for those, especially those. And for,
Better?
yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And if
there are,
anybody, later on, we'll add this in the notes so that if you can't see it on your phone, you'll still be able to see later. But yeah,
okay.
good.
So like I said, there are many models of grief and
Hmm.
there are many lenses through which we can look at grief. There is a clinical psychologist called Therese Rando. She's done
Right.
plenty of research. If you in fact Google her name, it'll always
Hmm.
show up as someone who's written a lot about grief. So what she says is that we have 6 stages, 3 phases through which grief goes. And I'll
Hmm.
quickly just talk
Sure.
about these. And you can, if you're listening in and you've lost someone, you can identify where you are. So the first stage is what you spoke about, Aparna, the avoidance stage,
Hmm.
where the loss has just happened, the
Hmm.
death is very, very proximate, and the family, the grievers are in the process of recognizing the loss,
Right.
that this person is not there anymore, an acknowledgement of this finality, right?
Hmm.
The next phase is called the confrontation phase, where there are two stages to it, reaction and recollection. So, in
Right.
reaction, the person actually experiences the emotion. In the first stage, there is a numbness, they can't experience anything, they just going through the motions of life
Hmm.
almost automatically, robotically. In the second stage, they experience the pain and they identify what else they've lost.
Right.
Like some person has lost their identity of being a husband.
Hmm.
Some person may have lost financially because
Right.
of that death. So the secondary losses. The third stage is where you start recollecting and remembering realistically the good memories of that person. And you start recognizing that this loss has happened, that your world doesn't look the same anymore.
Right.
And you remember this person in a realistic fashion. It's not a question of oh, they are going to come back, or they just lost, I'm going to make sure that I have some connection with them in some other form. So it's a
Hmm.
very realistic upright recognition that this person is no more.
Hmm.
The fourth stage, which is called relinquishing old attachment, sounds a little harsh initially, but what this typically means is that the person is processing
Again,
intellectually.
Hvovi, can you come closer? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, it
Yeah.
means the person is processing the impact of the absence.
Hmm.
So, relinquishing old attachments doesn't mean that you forget the person. It simply means that your world now, that is the assumptive world that you had, you know that will not look the same anymore,
Right. Right.
because loss of death is irreversible. So,
Hmm.
this is where the person relinquishes the old attachments and recognizes now that there have to be new ones.
Right.
And then in the final phase, where there's accommodation, there is readjustment and reinvestment. That is, the assumptive world is now realigned. And then the person moves forward to have maybe a sense of purpose, caring for new things, sometimes even learning to enjoy. But
Hmm.
all this keeping in mind that there was that person in their life, their memories are still alive. And, I read somewhere that people think that grief will shrink over time. That doesn't happen. Grief
Hmm.
stays and our life grows around grief.
Right.
A new assumptive world grows around grief, and new attachments come in, new bonds come in. You may smile some days and suddenly you remember the person who's gone and say, oh my god, how can I do that? But
Hmm.
you say, I it happened naturally, I smiled naturally. So this is how grieving happens. Now, this is, like I said, the natural process of grieving. Not everybody goes through it the same way. And especially when it comes to complicated grief, these stages don't really apply.
Right.
In complicated grief, we may be stuck at some of one or two of these stages for a long time till some
Hmm.
intervention comes in.
So
Yeah.
typically there is this thing, right? People will often say that, you need to move on and, or, get over a loss. Is there a timeline to this? Is there a process to this? Is it even natural to expect, getting over or moving on?
Your question reminds me of all those mistakes I made in the early parts of my career as a psychologist,
Right.
believing that, sometimes we used to think that grief should only last a certain time.
Mm,
And we expect it to be culturally, it's expected as well. We've grown up thinking about this and reading and seeing it in movies, but no. In
mm,
fact, researchers say we don't even know where healthy grief leaves off and complicated grief starts. It's a very thin line, and the therapist has to be very, very careful about making that assumption. Because
mm,
remember, there is no intervention for grief, it just happens. And
right.
the person can do this for months, it can be years. The way to look at it is, are they realigning back to life?
Mm,
But in complicated grieving, they may not. They may actually keep on trundling down a path of disaster over and over again without sort of writing themselves back to normal. Or they may be in a place of complete shutdown, acting
mm,
like everything is normal
mm,
and nothing has gone wrong, which is again devastation for themselves and their dependents, typically children around them.
right.
So it's if you see certain signs that look like the person may not be grieving in a healthy fashion, do seek help,
Right.
or at the least reach out to a professional and speak up to them so that they can help you out.
Right. But there are people who might say that, look, I'm just channeling my grief into my work, or, something like that. And then at some point, suddenly, uh, they may break down, or they may have a moment of, uh, uh, kind of expressing their emotions, etc. Again, is that,
Happens.
natural course, or not always?
It also depends upon whether they are able to talk about the loved one,
Hmm.
um, and even go through phases where they feel angry at the loved one. All of this
Hmm.
is healthy. But the idea is, are they continuing to communicate?
Right.
Are they
Right.
continuing to manage life but also grieving at the same time? These
Right.
don't have to be two separate things, and they shouldn't be two separate things,
Hmm.
ideally. Uh, However, if the person has become a closed, literally a tight, box into which you cannot talk about the person who's passed at all around that person, around the griever, then that's not a healthy sign.
Hmm.
They should be comfortable speaking about it after some time and not clamped up.
Right. Right. And in terms of, the other thing that we are now seeing, you talked of shared grief as well, but is
Hmm.
there, in some sense, grief is also relative, right? So, or the loss is relative, but the grief may or may not be relative. But there is this feeling that sometimes, people might say, and I guess that links to the next question, is uh, people, you might either tell yourself, or somebody might tell you that, look, you only lost one person, whereas if you look at, the other person, they've had so much losses. um, how does it actually help the person, or, is it just individual?
It's pretty individual and it's not helpful. Uh, the Times of India published something on Sunday where they collected stories from people who've lost their loved ones in the first and second wave both. And
Hmm.
the title of the article was "What Not to Say to Someone
Hmm.
Who's Grieving." Yeah.
Right.
And in the COVID-19 time, because everybody is in a collective state of anxiety, right? So the sensitivity quotient has, I think, reduced a little bit. So
Hmm.
there are lots of things that you may hear, which are actually people asking questions about the illness rather
Hmm.
than attending to the person's death and the
Right.
grief of the mourner.
Right.
So that's what's happening, and it's not helpful to say those things. It's not helpful to say something like, wasn't that person vaccinated?
Hmm.
Or, in my so and so person's family, 11 people went,
Hmm.
or something of that nature. I mean, each one's loss is to be handled sensitively. So actually, our collective support right now, in the absence of research and in the absence of an understanding of how to handle this grief, community support is really going to be important
Right.
more than anything else.
Right. So I think that is that is something that we see often in discussions around grief, right? People, and it comes up in cases, for instance, of suicide. Comes up even in certain illnesses. People will start asking questions about what happened. uh, and I think for some people it seems like it's a good way of keeping the communication going, but for a lot of people, like it probably doesn't work. But again, any inputs on that or any advice on that?
So if the loss has been traumatic, and I would say in this time, a lot of losses have been traumatic, then the primary rule of trauma is the person will not talk about it in the initial phases.
Hmm.
We have to wait and allow them to talk about it.
Hmm.
A really, I think, misnomer in the grieving culture in India, especially a lot of Asian cultures as well, is get them to talk.
Hmm. Hmm.
Let them talk and let them get it out.
Right.
The fact is that maybe that applies in some context, but not in this one, not in the
Right.
COVID context.
Right.
And the person may react in two completely polar opposite manner. They may
Right.
react by not wanting to talk at all, so we respect that. They may react by wanting to talk for an hour or two about the thing over and over again.
Hmm.
Each person has their own method of reacting. So
Right.
if you are supporting somebody, then do realize that when you pick up the phone and call up the person, you may hear complete silence. They may not want to talk, or you may be on the phone for an hour and the person is just recounting the entire story over and over.
Hmm.
Both these are healing for the
Right.
person in their own way. And we just
Right.
respect that and go with it.
Right. Right. So I think coming to, you said that if somebody's talking about it, you should respect that. And you said some of the things you should not say, but can you kind of help us with what are some of the helpful things that people can say? And if you want to re-emphasize what they should not say, that's also.
Yeah, in fact, I'll put it up here. That's
Yeah.
nice. We're talking about it. So when you're speaking to somebody who is grieving,
Hmm.
some of the things we think are helpful may not really be helpful to the
Right.
person. And this
Right.
applies universally in all contexts, even our current context. Saying things like the person is in a better place,
Hmm.
or like you mentioned, it's all right, in other families, people have lost more members of
Right.
the family.
Right.
Or what's there, you can always remarry or you can have another child,
Right.
or God is looking after that person,
Hmm.
or they died young because they did good karma.
Correct.
These are
Correct.
all the things that we hear about, but they
Hmm.
sound empty and they sometimes can anger a person who is grieving,
Hmm.
not helpful. And this can come as a surprise to so many people. Just like around suicide, people think they're helping by not talking about a person who's, you know, talk is expressing about suicide. And similarly with grief, there are some
Hmm.
very sensitive things we need to keep in mind.
Right.
What not to say. Now, what do you say?
Hmm.
Just simple things. You don't have to have all the answers. Like, I'm sorry for your loss. I try to understand, but I don't think I can. But I can be
Hmm.
here for you.
Right.
Yeah. What help do you need? Let me know.
Hmm.
Like one of my clients said that the best help that she got was when somebody just, one of her friends, came in and dropped at the security gate an entire bag from a supermarket of things to eat.
Right.
And she ate that stuff, and her kids ate that stuff the entire week. I mean, imagine shops are shutting at 11 in the morning. Who is going to go running in the time of grieving and seeing if there's stock at home? So
Hmm.
just simple things like, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you out. You are in my prayers. I'm just a phone call away if you need anything.
Hmm.
Just sit with the person, be silent if they need to. Have a video call with them, and they may just be crying through the video call. And all you
Right.
need to do is just be there. The thing is, we are very awkward around grief,
Hmm.
just like we are awkward around suicide.
Hmm.
And these are the two emotions that humans find very difficult to work with.
Right.
Yeah, but remember, it's not about doing, it's about being. If you're just in the company of the person and silent and just there as a calm resource, it can be hugely healing.
Right. So one question somebody said that they were not able to call when the tragedy happened or when the loss happened. Is it too late to call, say, 2 weeks later or 1 month later?
It never is. It's never. Yeah. And there's never a good and a bad time.
Mm.
You can always reach out to anyone at any point of time. The person may not react favorably, happily. They may be angry with you as well. It's
Right.
something that we can anticipate. However, if you get over that initial awkwardness and just handle that anger, it won't be too long, because under that anger is just a lot of anxiety, a lot of sadness. They
Mm.
don't know where to turn, and so they're just lashing out wherever they can.
Right.
But or you may just hear somebody on the other end not talking, not giving you information, and you say, "Oh my God, did I do something wrong by calling up so late?"
Mm.
Just be normal and natural. Just be human.
Right.
I think
Right.
that should be enough for the person opposite. There's no correct time to call up someone.
Right. And one question that's just come as well is, we are seeing a lot of uh, people are trying to send out positive messages and so on, right? So, the question is this a form of denial, or is the toxic positivity itself a form of being in denial, and can it have far-reaching consequences?
It can. I don't think a person who has lost a loved one wants to wake up to a motivational message. It
Mm.
can, in fact, be heartbreaking to
Right.
wake up to that, right? From my own personal experience, I can tell you, when I've lost someone very close to me, it didn't help.
Mm.
Help at all when someone tells you something like, sends you a forward with a picture and a motivational message. Their intention might be good, but
Mm.
I won't react positively to it.
Right. Right.
So uh, try and do things not which are helpful to you, but which might be helpful to the person who's grieving.
Right.
And the only thing helpful to the person who's grieving is a supportive listener, someone who is silent and not talking about their losses, but just listening, and
Mm.
someone who's offering some kind of, let's say, practical help
Right.
that's really helpful at that point of time, and someone who's consistently there.
Mm.
Even if in this time of social distancing, just dropping a message saying, "Hello, I'm there," or I'm here for you.
Right.
Enough. That's more than enough.
Right. Right. And in these cases also, the one thing, because we are seeing a lot of deaths, and we are seeing what are now being called COVID orphans, how do you talk to a child who's lost uh, both parents, for instance?
This requires some
A whole
amount of
different
training.
section. Mm.
No, yeah, it requires a separate section, but there are a lot of NGOs that have been volunteering to do this work. If you are
Mm.
not sure what to do, then help the child by linking up with NGOs like that. There are lots of them around, and they have
Right.
trained counselors who can help the child by speaking to them for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But ideally, if we just look at the overall picture of how children react to grief, children are very simplistic. They want data.
Mm.
They don't know what is death. They don't know that it's permanent.
Right.
And they sometimes want information, such as, where is my mother, or where is my
Mm.
father? What happened to them?
Right.
Children are not protected by not giving them information. In fact, that creates bigger problems. I see
Mm.
adults who have been protected, so called, from
Correct.
grief in their childhood, and they grow up to have a lot of traumatic memories later.
Mm.
So, giving them just information that this is what happened to your parents in as simple words as possible may be helpful. But
Right.
again, if you run out of resources or you don't know what to say, the government has come up with helplines, and also there are NGOs offering helplines. Later, maybe Aparna, you could post it somewhere that may be helpful. I can give you some numbers
Sure.
of
Sure.
people who are working with children
Right.
specifically.
Right.
Are there more
Okay.
questions?
Uh, no, I'm just doing a final check. If there's any questions, you can. Um, I think one question that comes up also is, when should, given that this takes time, when or in what circumstance would you recommend that somebody see a counselor?
Hmm. As I said, Natural grieving, when it leaves off and becomes complicated grieving or complicated mourning,
Mm.
is often a very, um, I would say, a specialized way of kind of looking at it.
Right.
A lay person and even the person going through it may not be able to make out.
Right.
Trained therapists usually can. But here are a couple of signs that I already spoke about, but I'll reiterate them. If the person is in complete avoidance, not
Mm.
wanting to speak about the loved one at all, no
Mm.
memories, wants to put away all pictures, not want to talk about it, act as if nothing happened, um, you know, uh, tell people around them also to do the same, move on with life, let's get
Right.
on with work. Everything's okay now, it's over, it's done with.
Mm.
That's that's one of the signs. And the second is if their life goes down a very slow but progressive destructive path,
Right.
which
Right.
typically means first not caring for themselves, not caring for people around them, not caring about performance at work, even losing a job,
Mm.
financial losses,
Right.
basically going down a path of destruction or immediately jumping into another relationship as a way of finding solace. This we can say it happens sometimes with young married couples
Right.
when they lose their partner very early.
Mm.
So if the person is taking decisions too close after the death of a loved one, which don't look very logical and which are actually destructive to their health and their mental health, then
Right.
taking for going for therapy, I think, should be the first call.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all. Any final words or any, if there's somebody who's uh, kind of not sure, feeling confused, feeling, what's the point of all of life when there's so much going on? What's your, one advice to them?
Um, Death is definitely irreversible. That's all I can say. And it's important to recognize that we can say a number of things like life moves on and life goes on. However, remember that don't look at the external world to give you an idea about how to grieve. What you are
Mm.
feeling is your own, and your acceptance is your own individual acceptance. It's you can read a number of books, you can do a lot of healthy things to get better, but the pain is your own and can't be
Mm.
compared to anyone. Another thing I'd like to say is that in this time of loss, where there's a collective loss, if you feel that people around you are not offering you the support you need, it might be a good time to also take a temporary break from them. It's not
Right.
wrong to do that because
Right.
look after your mental health first. You can re engage back or connect back at a different time, but your support system and community support is what is going to get you through this time.
Right.
So try and keep your immediate ecosystem filled with people who offer you room to talk, room for silences, room to mourn at your own pace, practical support that you need, and who don't expect you to be strong. So that's all I'll say. That your journey
Just
is
one
your own.
final coming back, because I think it might help if somebody is really struggling with uh, kind of keeping up with their daily activities or work, and all of that. um, Again, coming back to, is there a time frame to say that, okay, if it doesn't get better in so and so and I can't resume my normal functions within this period, then I really should seek a counselor?
I wish I could say that that would be true maybe for other things like an anxiety disorder or depression. There is no one way that we can say it.
Hmm.
That after a year, if you're still mourning, then you should go visit a therapist. No, I
Hmm.
won't say that we should have these timelines. We should instead look at the behavior the person is doing and the engagement they have with their
Hmm. Hmm.
new normal.
Right.
So just like the COVID is developing a new normal, the death of someone creates a new normal for us,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I think we have to look at that more than really the time.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Havovi. Thank you for your time once again. I think it's again a very useful session, and I hope to our audience out there, thank you for joining, and I hope you found it useful. And we will be talking on the same topic in Hindi on Thursday. And we will take a break of a week or so to figure out what next. But in the meantime, if you do have any suggestions, questions, etc., keep sending them, and we will address that. Thank you, Hvovi.
Thank you, and take care, everyone.